Good girl. Good girl. All right. Welcome to HortTube. My name is Jim Putnam. This is the garden question and answer video that I do pretty much every Sunday. You can ask gardening questions down in the comment section below, and that's where I pick from each week. And we have a bunch this week. I don't know how many Steph wrote these down. There's 25 for this week, and that's from I don't know how many questions were actually asked down below, but we try to pick ones that are kind of relevant to whatever's going on. We usually will pick a few from videos that we've had up the previous week as well. Holly is out here for just a minute. I'm going to put her back in just a minute. It's 81 degrees at 7:30 in the morning on Saturday as I'm filming this. It's so crazy. It was 106 degrees at the airport yesterday, which is really, really high for us. We did have some humidity, which is very helpful to the plants. During this little dry spell we've had very low humidity, which is unusual for us. And so that was really adding to the plants struggling to come up with water. But interestingly, yesterday on a 106 degree day with humidity, the plants actually had no problem, responding in the evening and bringing water in through their stomata and can just drink from the air a bit. So it's interesting the difference in humidity versus not having humidity, despite the temperatures were actually higher. Anyway, let's see. I answered one question last week about whether I thought I was actually teaching people or not. If people were getting something out of it, and you guys made a tremendous amount of really great, wonderful comments down below about things you had learned from the channel over the years. So I was really super appreciative of that. I definitely don't want to let that pass without talking about that. There are some upcoming questions here in this video about my opinion on daylilies, some plant availability, whether sterile plants produce pollen or not. Some interesting questions coming up today. The weekly garden planner is discounted $30 for the whole month of July, so through July 31st. And so there's a discount code below this video for that. If you're interested in the weekly garden planner, we're in the process of adding August and September, which have already been shot this next week. And actually October is ready to shoot. So we're staying out ahead of that. And we're gonna continue to add content to the weekly garden planner. So you're getting this basic outline of 4 weeks for each month that we've worked on so far, and we're going to be adding to it in the future. So we're basically taking notes as we go on the things that we're doing in the garden and making sure they're not missing from the weekly garden planner so that we can continue to kind of perfect it over a period of time. Okay, 3 videos from this week. There was a drone video overhead from the garden, which is the start of the master tour video, and I just walked the paths to show you how the paths were laid out in the garden, and I showed some, if you haven't watched that video, some footage of what the garden looked like before it was a garden. The back porch got torn off after that footage. The building in the corner was in the process of being built, and it was just weeds, and that's all it was. So you could see the difference between Clown College out here in the front garden and what it originally was in that video. And then a joke video on all the plants in the neighborhood being cut into meatballs. There were some funny comments on that about some of them look more like meatloaf than meatballs, so that was kind of funny. And then a video on watering in the summertime and just I call it sudden death season, where you can lose plants because they're under stress. So you get various reasons from dry to wet to disease problems, insect problems. Lots of problems when the plants are in weakened conditions from this heat stress, you can get, that's the time of year that minor insect problems, minor problems become big problems, and they become big problems so fast that the plants drop dead. So that was a video for that. Okay, that was from this past week. Somebody asked, because Ram and Tom always send plants home with us, because we have several plants in the garden that you'll see if you're following this master garden tour that's starting this next week. We've filmed the first 2 pieces already from this bed that's behind me. Ram always, there's plants in the garden that Ram sent us home with. They were wondering if we take her plants as well. Yeah, but when we were down there 3 weeks ago or whatever that was, we took her the Pearls of Perfume Philadelphus over there, the mock orange. We had one of those and we took that to her. That thing is still flowering. It's flowered 106 degrees yesterday. It's still got flowers on it over there. It's amazing how long that plant can actually bloom. Okay, Let's see. So somebody has afternoon sun has fried Globosinana cryptomeria, touch of gold holly, soft touch hollies. Soft touch hollies are just in general kind of weak plants, and so I wouldn't judge myself killing soft touch hollies. I see them dead all over the place. Very popular plant, but I see them die the first sign of drought or really heat stress. They seem to really struggle. But Globosinana cryptomeria, that you know, and other hollies should be able to hold up in most afternoon sun. I don't know where this. Steph didn't put down where this person was, if they had actually written it down. But I don't know how long these plants have been in the ground. So we can get burn this time of year, and I have burn on a little bit of a cryptomeria over here that's in a container, where I let the container get a little dry, and the foliage didn't have any water in the top of it, in the plant itself, and so it burned on the top. So you might see that this time of year, where they haven't been adequately watered, or the plant's just kind of out of balance and it couldn't get enough water up into it, you know, to offset how hot it was outside. So I don't know if they're newly planted like that, then I don't know that I take anything more than it's a learning experience for, you know, having cut them back a bit after you plant them, or that kind of thing. But these should hold up in the full sun. If you're in Texas and, you know, the sun just hits a little different for you, you know, on that western side of your house, you may want to flip over to something like junipers, or something that's really, truly heat tolerant, or something that's native to your area. Maybe a helpful piece of information there. But sometimes it's just time related. And if you're planting on a western wall like that, and you know it's going to cook that next season, I'd fall plant those things. Make sure that they got plenty of time and to come out of the stress of the root damage that you're doing to them and that kind of thing, and get themselves well established for that next spring or that next summer. If you plant them in the middle of spring, and so they're dealing with that stress and then dealing with the sun stress and the heat of that side of the house, you know, it's just too much for them. Let's see, do we rotate plant rows? So that would be, we have a very small space that's in the full sun. Well, the entire front garden is in the full sun most of the day where I'm standing. Sun's coming up over here, over my left shoulder right now, and in fact, I won't be able to film out here more than another 15 minutes or so before it'll be blown out. And then we have this spot over here on the north and west side of the house that is in the full sun all day. That's where our vegetables are. I've got them consolidated together because of rabbits, number one, because, you know, they're just a pain out here in the city here, and I don't really have a place to rotate them. So we were getting squash borers on our zucchini and squash. I just quit growing them. You know, I don't want to fight. Again, I'm talking about swimming uphill. I can probably find free squash or zucchini all over the place, because people that are growing them well have lots, you know, of extra. And we're just growing the things that, I'm growing the things in the vegetable garden that seem to produce easily for me. So I'm not having to fight to do it. And our tomato, oh my gosh, we have so many tomatoes. It's just wild. I've been taking them everywhere I go. The last week, I went to have coffee with friends this morning. You're getting tomatoes, and you're getting tomatoes. There's a lot of them right now, but I don't rotate the rows. If I had some sort of issue that cropped up in them, some sort of disease issue in whatever it was, I'd probably just skip a few years growing them, just because I don't think rotating something, if you're on a tiny lot, what is rotating something, rotating a row, you know, 40 feet away gonna do? Probably virtually nothing. If you're on a 100-acre farm and you're rotating an entire crop year to year to year, you know, that's probably something. But in a tiny lot, moving something just a little bit over, probably not really gonna change anything. Let's see. Okay, and is rotating good for both vegetables and annual beds? We rotate our annuals in here just because we like to do try new varieties on a year-to-year basis. Some things will stay, but our annuals are probably 40% rotated each year. So over the course of maybe 3 years or whatever, it'll be all new varieties out here. But we're doing that for interest, which is probably also beneficial for you know, them spreading a disease or leaving something in the soil that's problematic, or using up nutrients, whatever it is. So this person is in Arkansas, and they're in sandy soil. So, you know, I always talk about having this clay-based soil here, but I do realize that a lot of people have very sandy soils. Water falls through them, nutrients fall through them. But it's the same practices of adding organic material to the top. So this person's been mulching for years. They've been composting for years. Their leaves are large, and so they don't leave those. They do get rid of those. And what else can they do to improve their soil? I think you're doing the right things. It just takes a while to build organic material and have it actually work for most people. I talked about that in last week's video and the week before. This is always this entire channel is built on soil health, and so you're doing the right things. I would suggest on your leaves that maybe you can bring those large leaves out to a driveway and then take a mower and cut them up and then reuse them back out there. So you don't necessarily. I would think about maybe figuring out how to continue to use those leaves, just breaking them down in some way so that you can use them. Because I know when they're, big old leaves on things, you don't want to, have those piled up around your plants necessarily, and it's unsightly. But you can turn that material into a halfway decent looking mulch just by using a lawnmower or something like that to cut it up and reuse it. But you're doing the right things, but there is a certain amount of patience that was required for, you think about most of these places, like this neighborhood would have been a wooded area, 200 years ago in all likelihood. And they came in here in 1948 or whatever and stripped it, flattened everything, put the roads in, backfilled the soil with whatever. And, it takes a long time to recover from that. Most people are living in much, much newer properties than that. And damage was done when it was being built. Maybe it's an old piece of farmland that was damaged from farming it to death, basically, the soil. And so it's just going to take a while for some people. It took 23 years at the old house. I lived there, and you could dig down, and it was easy digging. The first 10 years I was in that house, it was not that way. It just took a long time with a new house and the way they were constructed and the way they pushed that soil all over the place and how much they compacted that soil to really make a giant difference in improving it. Okay, let's see. I'm gonna put her in the house real quick. Come on, girl. Come on, Holly. Come on. It's just incredibly hot out here, even first thing in the morning right now. Let's see. Plants beside roses and hydrangeas that deserve more attention. Literally everything deserves more attention. It's so crazy to me that, forever roses were the #1 category. And I think I have another rose question coming up in this thing. Roses were the #1 category. I'm guessing if we did a count now of new plants being added out onto the market and what people are purchasing, hydrangeas have probably taken first place now. Part of that is additional species that have been added, where most people were just planting hydrangea macrophyllus and a few oak leaf hydrangeas. There were some, when I sold hydrangea arborescens at the farmer's market for years, it was mostly an older customer base for that plant. It was a plant that was used a long time ago. It's a great native hydrangea, but it wasn't until recently that we've had everybody's all in on hydrangea arborescens because of the new varieties that have come out of NC State's plant breeding that are an Improving Winters brand, and so that species has been added as super popular. And then hydrangea paniculata is like this moon dance back here, which is just starting to put on its color. I think you can see in the frame right there. There were just a few varieties out there like PG and Pinky Winky, and they got gigantic. So not a lot of people planted them because they were tree hydrangeas, literally called tree hydrangeas. And then here along comes limelight hydrangea, and then through plant breeding, look how compact that moon dance hydrangea paniculata is. So now there's paniculatas just everywhere. And then we've seen an uptick in mountain hydrangeas, hydrangea serrata, all kinds of things. It's just like that. The hydrangea macrophyllus became remontant or repeat blooming, through some plant breeding. And so we've seen the hydrangea market just explode, absolutely explode. But, and another reason for that is because it's what people purchase. You know, that Hydrangea paniculata is easy to sell. If it's on a table at Lowe's or Home Depot or any garden center today, people are going to tote it out of there. Whereas all of my viburnum, which bloomed back in March and early April, before the crowd was at the garden center, you know, a lot of those things, they just don't sell as well. So I could come out with the greatest viburnum of all time. Well, let's lower that a little bit. A great viburnum, and they're going to sell maybe a couple $100,000 in a year if I was lucky. If I had a great viburnum, a couple $100,000 maybe in a year. Whereas, you know, sunshine ligustrum or repeat blooming azaleas or a new disease-resistant rose or this compact growing Hydrangea paniculata may sell millions in a year. And so as a plant breeder, you know, you're looking, you know, you get paid by the piece, you know, how many get sold in a year. And so a lot of people are all in on roses and hydrangeas, and just has been for a while. And I kind of don't blame them, but there's a lot of room out there in the world for improvements in a lot of our natives that would make them more likely to be bought by homeowners. And then of course, you know, in things like, you know, like I said, viburnums back in the distant, you know, back here behind me, and, you know, disease resistance in dogwoods and all kinds of things. But a lot of these things, some of them take longer. The breeding programs take longer in trees. So that's one thing that prevents tree, you know, there are places like the Morton Arboretum that are doing lots of tree work, but, you know, it takes generations to prove that a tree is better than its predecessor. It doesn't fall apart in a storm or whatever it is. You got to wait for a storm, right, to prove that. But 100% agreement that roses and hydrangeas get way too much attention, and probably are overall just way overdone. Love lots of hydrangeas, but there's a lot of room out there for plant breeders to come in and find other things that are interesting and work on them and improve them. And if you move the bar on them, maybe have them be one of the plants that people want to carry out. Somebody said how long to wait after spraying Roundup. I don't know what you're waiting for, so that's the question, but typically it's like 7 to 10 days on glyphosate before you can do most things. It is, again, I'm not telling anybody to use Roundup, but you know, it's been around for a long time. A lot of people do use it. The problem is, and I'm going to tell you that the reason I wrote down this question is, Roundup is not Roundup anymore. If you look at the label on Roundup, it's not glyphosate. So if you're buying Roundup off the shelf at wherever you're buying it from, look at the label. It's a different chemistry. And now it says kills in just a few hours, which is some sort of chemical they're putting in there to make it look like it's killing it really fast so that you're more satisfied, because glyphosate takes a week or so for it to actually look like it's killing the plant, because it just starves it. What glyphosate, the action that glyphosate has is that you spray crabgrass or something like that, and it just basically starves it. And that's what kills it. So starving it takes a week or more. So now they've put chemistry in there that appears to be killing it much faster, but then there's some other chemistry in it, and then you'll see they'll prevent weeds for some period of time. So if you're buying Roundup, you're not buying Roundup anymore, not the original Roundup. And so read the back of that label very thoroughly, because I don't think you want to be spraying that chemistry if you're coming right behind and trying to do something else. Because if you'll read those bottles, they'll say, you know, works for 2 months or works for whatever, some period of time. So there's some other chemical in there that's preventing things and lingering in the soil. It's actually hard to find glyphosate now, just straight glyphosate at the garden, you know, at the Lowe's or Home Depot. It got such a bad rap that, and there've been lawsuits and other things that, you know, it's hard to find, but it had the shortest, you know, one of the shortest amount of times from the time you would spray like your Bermuda grass or something like that, and to be able to work back out there. It just broke down in the environment faster than other things. And not defending or knocking. I just wrote this question down because the new chemistry of what Roundup is not what it originally was. And so read that label very carefully. I think you're going to find that you can't use that particular product, but you can find glyphosate somewhere. It's off patent, and so now it'll be called Gly something, you know, wherever you're finding it. But a lot of the farm stores still have it. So somebody said the Russian sage flops. Would trimming and spraying help? Yes. And we have a Russian sage that'll be maybe in the 3rd or 4th video over here that's a dwarf variety. So also keep in mind, you know, we're talking about improving other plants that deserve, you know, to be improved. I've got a great example of that with that Russian sage that I have over here that's only about 2 feet tall in full bloom, which is highly unusual for Russian sage to not get too tall and flop. So, you know, there's a lot of room out there for plant breeders to improve plants, and that Russian sage is a great example of that, and it has pollinators on it all day long. So I'm gonna move this operation to the back garden. Somebody asked if I had an update on Megan and Jeremy and if the Bristol Briar sold their garden. Yes, it did sell. I don't know if it sold to somebody who wanted it as a garden or just needed a house. You know, there's such limited availability for houses in our area, so I don't really know. And I was down on the Gulf last week. The whole week I was down on the Gulf. I was in Loxley, Alabama, and then I was over in Louisiana, and I actually had the intent of going down to Bellingrath and shooting a video, hopefully to shoot a video with Todd and maybe Jeremy at Bellingrath. And I do have a video on the channel at Bellingrath if you want to go back and look at that. And they were together in Boston at some sort of thing, plant nerd thing. And so they weren't there while I was down there. Otherwise, you guys would have seen a video with Jeremy and an update. But I'll get back down there at some point and visit with them for sure. Let's see. When creating a raised bed, does covering the roots of trees prove detrimental to the tree? That's a tree-to-tree thing, and I just don't like to make recommendations on these kinds of things. I think for the most part, if you're using some sort of all organic soil in there, the trees have an incredible ability just to come up and root into your, you know, into your raised beds, unless you're putting something down, you know, at the bottom of them to prevent that from happening. And the other thing is, if you're stepping out, the further you get away from the tree, the smaller the piece of the pie. If we say there's 360 degrees or a circle around the tree, if you get far enough away from the tree, your raised bed may only be covering up, 10 degrees of that pie. And so if it's a very small amount, it's probably not going to do any damage to the tree. If you're putting raised beds if I went around this oak and I put 8 raised beds really close to it, I think that could be problematic. Another question I would have sometimes is, what's the purpose of your raised beds? I mean, my neighbor right here, and I don't, he's got raised beds for his vegetables. He's watering them constantly. He's basically got no vegetables over there. My vegetables are in the soil over here, and they're performing like crazy. You would think I'm just some sort of great vegetable grower. It's just because they're in the ground. And I basically used the same amount of organic material that he put in those boxes and mixed it in with that clay. And mine are performing well, and I guarantee you they're more nutrient dense overall as well. If we took my tomato and sent it in to a lab and took their tomato, we would see that they're far more nutrient dense in the ground. And so this trend of raised beds, they're tricky to water. They require ongoing, it's expensive, to build them and fill them and keep them full. If you're using a lot of organic material in them, the food that you produce from them is not going to be nutrient dense. My exceptions to this thing is if, for age related reasons, I don't want to bend over as much. That makes sense to me. Really rocky soil that it's really hard to improve because of rocks. Soil that really has like some sort of off the chart pH is too high or way too low or something like that. There are reasons that I would have raised beds, but I do, and just throwing out into the world, if you Google search garden beds, Google now thinks garden beds are nothing but raised beds. And I say to Google, this is a garden bed, and it's not a raised bed. A raised bed is something you do if you need some sort of additional help, physically, or your soil is so poor that you just can't possibly improve it. But I say to most people watching, you do not need raised beds. You'll grow more nutrient dense foods by improving your soil, which may take a minute. Like I said in that earlier question, right? It might take a minute to improve your soil well enough to really produce great crops. But I can see it right here and here, side by side. I got a side by side comparison here. There's no It's not even close. Bags of black stuff, boy, it looks, filling boxes. Man, we're gonna produce the best vegetables ever. It's actually just hard to water those things. It's hard because they're raised up, and once that organic material gets dry, sometimes it's hard to re-wet it. The roots get so matted in the organic material that you have a hard time keeping it wet. So there's just a lot of, just throwing this out there. You know, I've seen more and more YouTubers jump on selling raised beds, and you know, even a couple of YouTube of plant or vegetable based channels that were for years just showing how to improve soil, and were really teaching people how to make soil that would produce lots of food on it. They're all in on raised beds all of a sudden because they're making, you know, money off of it, I guess. Again, there's reasons for it, but you know, another opinion by Jim that won't be appreciated by some. Let's see. But I don't want to tell you about putting them around trees because, you know, yes, you could potentially damage the tree. It just depends. I mean, these roots control different parts of the tree sometimes. So if you kill one root, perhaps you could kill some, you know, a larger limb up in the tree by accident. So I don't like to answer some of those questions because I don't want to be responsible for hurting your tree. Let's see. So somebody said there were a couple different things from the summer watering video that I kind of regretted not saying. One of them I say all the time, but one of them was somebody brought up using a moisture meter, and certainly there's moisture meters available on Amazon that you can use, and they can be helpful in determining whether the soil's wet or not. So there were a couple comments about somebody who just swears by them. So you know, you can definitely try that as well. If you're struggling to figure out if the soil's actually moist, you can put a moisture meter down in the ground. And the other thing is, on that super, super hot day we had yesterday, 106 at the Raleigh airport, I could come out here if the plants were in a struggle and just spray over the top of them, you know, and use evaporative cooling to actually cool them off. So if I come out here and spray, literally just a mist over the top of them, as that water evaporates, it will cool the area around them. So that's one technique you can use to just kind of cool the space off in the late afternoon. And I didn't say that in that video. Let's see. This person would like to plant a row of boxwood meatballs and 2.5 by 2.5. Which better boxwood is the best choice? I think Skylight is probably going to be the best choice for almost everyone, for almost every job, because it's the boxwood that I think grows fast enough, but not, it's boxwood, it's not going to grow super fast, but faster than the others, and you can keep it any shape you want to keep it. I think ultimately Skylight will be the most popular of the 4 better boxwoods. You know, that's the one that's out by the front fence. I think it'll be like in the 3rd video on the tour, videos. Somebody said, are wood chips mulch? Yeah, any organic material that you're using are mulch. I don't like to use a whole lot of wood chips in my beds later on. Again, there's this thing about wood requires nutrients to break down. So it has to temporarily steal a little bit of nitrogen that it needs to break down, and then it returns that nitrogen later. But that period of time where it was stealing nitrogen could be detrimental to some perennials and annual flowers and that kind of thing. So if you're going to use wood chips as mulch, definitely around your established shrubs and trees, you're not going to have any problem with it. But I would be careful piling it up around my perennial plants, my herbaceous plants, non-woody plants, because I think it's an overblown internet thing about it stealing nitrogen, because it does return it. But if you're growing something seasonally and it does off color it a bit for a period of time while it's breaking down, you know, that's not going to look great. So I would avoid it. Just use compost. If you're going to do like wood chips and compost, just do compost around your annuals and perennials and do wood chips in the rest of the beds. If that's a combo you're looking for. The way ours is it's wood chips in the paths, triple shredded hardwood in the beds, and a little bit of compost in with our annuals and our vegetable garden over there. Let's see. Okay, so somebody said, what are the positives of opting out of a fence back here? So, I mean, we have that little grass strip over there where Griffin and Holly can go and have some open space over there. So I didn't really, by taking away all the lawn and the open space back here, The dogs didn't really have a good spot back here anyway, so it's not, you know, no real reason to fence it in for them. They can't use it anyway. But we have that spot over there that they can go to. The thing about fencing, and I've said this in many consultations, where people want to put a wall of something in, either plants or fence or whatever, is that I don't want to be in a prison if I don't have to be. You know, I've got this wall of plants over here. If you're following the channel, there's 13, 14 different plants along this wall over here, because my neighbor over here is right there and I don't necessarily want to see him. So that seemed like a good place to screen. But this back area is just woods. I don't really need to put a fence between me and the woods, unless I had deer. I mean, deer would be a reason that I would put a 7-foot fence back there. And then this area over here, you know, if you were here for the open house, you know, we can look out a long way by not enclosing ourselves into these spaces. So as I'm looking at screening, some of you live in subdivisions where you're completely surrounded, and no matter where you try to be in your back garden, you're going to have eyes on you because of a 2nd-story window or that kind of thing. So to me, those are areas that you might want to put a wall of stuff in. But for the vast majority of folks, when I'm doing consultations, it's like, hey, just stand back and say, hey, I want to put a plant right there because I don't want to see their porch, you know, when they're outside cooking out. Or there's a 2-story window over there, so let's pick something tall for that spot. But let's don't put ourselves completely in a prison the rest of the time. It's nice to get a line of sight out of the garden too. So for me, if you can, I would walk out on your back patio and go, what is the most important thing for me to screen? And then figure out whether that's a fence or plants or, you know, whatever you're going to use to screen it. It may just be some sort of wooden piece on the side of your patio that you grow a vine in, so the screen is much closer to you to give you some privacy on your patio, something like that. But just for me, on a personal level, I look around this and go, man, I get this. It's like I own all that, but I don't, you know, by being able to see out into it and it not being somebody's windows or their cookout or whatever. Let's see. That was it for that page. I'm only at 12. This is going to be too long, I think. Okay, so somebody said, please set up direction of sun exposure on the plant tour. And that, again, that rises in the front garden out there, and it'll come over me. You're starting to see the stuff behind me get a little blown out. So that's before 8 o'clock in the morning, the sun reaches right here behind me. And you'll see that in the tour video as well. But it definitely rises in the front garden, sets in the back garden. Do I have plans for another open house? Definitely. We will definitely have another open house, and I'll let you guys know when that is. It will be a ticketed thing this next time, because I think we had 800 people in 2 days, and if it hadn't have been 96 degrees, I think it would have been double that, because I had a lot of people tell me it was just, you know, it was too hot or whatever. So I think that I need to ticket it in some way, and what we'll do is do it as a fundraiser for something. And so, you know, if we're collecting money, we'll also be raising money for some sort of charity-based thing or garden or whatever. We appear not to have roses. Why? So we do have one ground cover rose out in the front garden, and it's a fairly disease-resistant rose and blooms on its own without me doing a lot of work to them. And for me, the world has enough roses without me. There's roses, you know, we have the Raleigh Rose Gardens in the neighborhood. So if I want to go see roses, I can go see, you know, a really, really nice rose garden. And we walked through there 2 days ago, and it was still looking great despite the heat and everything. But of course, they're watering them, they're spraying them, they're fertilizing them, they're deadheading them. They are working hard on that rose garden. So that's one of the reasons, is I don't want to work that hard. You know, I don't want to be doing maintenance on roses. It's just not a draw for me on a personal level. I don't particularly like fragrant flowers, and I've said that in the past. There are fragrant flowers that I do like. I like osmanthus and some of the subtle things, but gosh, I grew hundreds of thousands of gardenias. I would grow Daphne, which is a really difficult plant to grow. They actually overwhelm me. They're almost too much, and some of those fragrant roses are that way for me as well. They're just like too perfumey. But a lot of people love them. I mean, I get it. I totally and completely get it. I'm just not a rose person. We have a lot of rose family members out here. And so a lot of things from the Rosaceae, like Indian hawthorns and my Amelanchier are out there, the serviceberry. Lots of things in that particular plant family, but not roses themselves, except for one. Okay, so somebody has mealybugs on their dwarf Burford hollies on their foundation. They cut them way back to improve the airflow, and they're hoping the birds will handle the rest. Any ideas? I think occasionally you'll see, I mean, there's some dwarf Burford hollies on the house that's through this alley, and behind me has a row of dwarf Burfords on the road on the other side. They were actually in a video, weirdly, earlier this year. And I can always see insect problems down in the bottom of those. Those plants are stressed. I mean, they were planted this close together, and it's hot outside, and so their plants are under stress, so they're gonna be vulnerable to insect-related issues like this. The main thing is, those hollies shed like crazy year over year over year. We call them evergreen, but they're shedding leaves. I think occasionally you do need to shear them and then clean them up underneath, rake everything out, and remulch them, and really, so you're right to build air movement, but also try to improve the conditions of the plant by raking some of those old leaves out from under it, using those somewhere else for something else, and then again remulching, watering them in well. Kind of decide whether or not they're planted too close together, because those were planted, I mean, they're Nellie Stevens hollies that were planted, you know, less than 3 feet apart maybe, and so no amount of water almost is going to cure that. So really every other one of those needs to be removed. That's the kind of things I would think about, is figuring out why that plant is under such stress that it's being attacked easily. So somebody would love a video on composting and processing organic matter on our lot. So in the past, we've just had a cold compost pile, and it back here, and now I took out that little greenhouse back there. It's too shady back there for me to really do a hot compost well. And so we're gonna be building a compost bin over here in the sun on the back of the vegetable garden. So as soon as my tomatoes are done, that project's gonna happen this year, and I'll show you all my composting. But I've been just doing cold compost since I've been here. Just running things through a shredder and then allowing them just to break down in a cold pile back here on their own. And then we've used it. Gosh, the plants back there that we've planted recently, really happy because they were planted in an old compost pile. But yeah, there'll be more on that coming up. Let's see. Do sterile plants have pollen or produce nectar? This is a great question, really great question. Most sterile plants do produce nectar, and you'll see, you know, like on our we have African basil back here, which is a hybrid between two species of basil. And pollinators absolutely go crazy for that plant, but it doesn't set seed. So it is sterile. It is a sterile hybrid, but it does produce nectar. So yes, on the nectar on most sterile plants. So you're not going to necessarily lose the pollinators by having sterile plants. Where do they produce pollen? Some do and some don't. There can be different reasons for sterility. You can have deformed anthers, if you remember your botany class on all the flower parts. You can have other parts of the flower that are deformed from it being a hybrid in some way. And so it can be that, or it can be just a lack of producing pollen. All kinds of reasons for the sterility, but most of them still do produce some nectar, which draws in pollinators. And that African basil, right at the top of the list of all the pollinator plants in this garden. I've been talking about it for 4 years, but if you want to save it through the winter, you got to take a cutting because it's not from seed. Not the best view in the garden, but the sun is running me off of the other angles here. When will autumn moonstruck be available? Are they currently just catching up on production? So autumn moonstruck is the variegated encore azalea. Yes, there were a lot of them down in Loxley at Flowerwood Nursery. One of the issues here is encore azaleas are grown in a grower group. Okay, so there's a group of nurseries that grow them in a grower group. Any nursery can grow them, so they can buy liners or rooted cuttings and then buy the tags and the containers and grow them. But then there's also a bigger group called a grower group that produces them in kind of mass, and they'll produce them for the landscape supply places, for landscapers to get them. Site One is an example of a landscape supply place. And for Lowe's and Home Depot and some of the bigger, landscapers and that kind of thing. And so it may be that they're going to show up at the Home Depot in Georgia before they show up at the Home Depot in North Carolina, because it's a different nursery that supplies us the shrubs from North Carolina versus Georgia, or they come to North Carolina first and not to South Carolina. So there's different growers for different spaces. So while I saw them in Loxley at Flowerwood has the areas that they have their areas for Lowe's and Depot and others. So a lot of times the availability will just be what nursery jumped on it the quickest and what state do they actually sell in, you know, for garden centers and for nurseries. And so that's part of it as well. That plant's going to be super, super popular. Anybody that saw it here during the garden tour, I mean, that's a great looking variegated azalea, and I have never said that about a variegated azalea. I've been in this business for 38 years looking for the perfect variegated azalea, and that one appears to be a super, super stable variegated azalea. Okay, so somebody asked about the van during the drone tour. We have a Class B motorhome, which is a van, and I just got it. We had a Class C motorhome. When you've seen us travel in the past, you see me do a video at the Morton Arboretum, which I talked about a minute ago in Chicago, or Chicago Botanic Garden, or you saw us do a video at Isley in Portland last year. We were actually traveling in a motorhome, and we were towing my Jeep. Terrible gas mileage and not particularly fun towing a vehicle. And so I sold both the Jeep and the motorhome this spring, and I got that van, and we've been traveling in that a little bit so far, but not. We haven't taken a long trip in it yet. Just several short trips. It's much smaller, and between the dogs and us, it's a pretty small space, but it's easier to maneuver. It's easy to get in and out of places. If you saw the Charlotte tour I did with Jay Sifford, I was able to pull that van right up to those folks' house and shoot that video. The dogs were in the air conditioner, you know, while we were shooting that video. So it's much more nimble, and the gas mileage is way, 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 way better. And just less overall stress of towing something. Okay, and it's a Coachman motorhome. They asked what kind it was. And then I got my opinion on daylilies. Again, my opinions don't matter at all. But I've never been a giant daylily fan. Here in the South, we get rust on them particularly bad. So up in the north, you may not have rust issues on your daylilies. So we've seen, you know, if I go over here and look at the daylily, Raleigh just has so many cool garden things. We have a city park over here that has a daylily display in it, not that far from me. And if you go through those daylilies right now, boy, those old varieties a lot of them look really rough from rust-related issues. I know that Darwin Perennials has got a series of extremely rust-resistant daylilies. I saw them in Chicago a few weeks ago, and I saw them in Loxley this past week. And boy, next to daylilies that are covered in rust. So I think we're going to see here in the South daylilies kind of make a little bit of a comeback because the foliage is going to look good, and you know, they're great. You know, they're repeat blooming ones. So they've taken the repeat blooming part of it and the rust resistance and kind of combined them together. So I think we'll see that come back. But I like the daylilies I actually have always liked are the giant ones. And so we have one called Autumn Minaret over here next to the driveway. I've showed it a couple times recently, and it was on my Instagram page a week or two ago. It's 7 feet tall. It's still in bloom right now. Awesome, awesome plant. And so as daylilies go. And so 7 foot tall daylily, that's my kind of thing, because it's just different than whatever other people have. But there are a group of giant daylilies. Why are 1 gallon plants hard to find? I think it's just the price point that people like in the stores, or those 2 and 3 gallon plants. And I think people are just more satisfied with the size. I think all the nurseries are doing, you know, their math on this as to what's selling, what moves off the table, what's shipping easily for them, what they can grow in a reasonable amount of time and get the most bang for their buck, right? To get the most out of the plant that they can. And 1 gallon shrubs doesn't fit that as well. And so you see some 1 gallon shrubs, but not a lot. I grew, this is what I did. My nursery, 20 years, I grew trade 1 gallon plants, which are 3-quart pots. This is a 2 gallon container right here, but I grew 3-quart. We called them 1 gallons, but they're really trade gallon pots because they're only 3 quarts. That's what I grew, and I sold them to other nurseries to grow out. But I also had a spot at the Raleigh Farmers Market for nearly 20 years. And in that spot at the farmer's market, I sold those trade gallon plants, and there was a giant market for it. I mean, a really giant market for people who have hard to dig in soils, or again, back to these raised bed things. Maybe they're just older and it's just harder to dig a hole. Maybe they just like watching things grow, which I do. We love putting small things in the ground, and you know, if it's some things that are in this garden are going to require a lot of pruning in the future, or they're going to have to be moved. By buying a tiny plant, I'm able to enjoy it a few more years before I get to that point. So there's a lot of reasons. Root, you know, digging in between roots, you know, had a lot of that. People buying plants for that reason. So there's a lot of reason to grow them, for homeowners to want them. But it must be at such a low rate that the 2 gallons and the 3 gallons make more sense for the nurseries. I'm sure they're, you know, like every other business now, these very large nurseries are crunching a lot of data, so they know what will get bought, what will get picked up, and what will get sold, and so you know they can sell more of them next week to the garden center or the box store or whatever. You know, somebody has a family memorial crepe myrtle cutting. I guess they took a cutting off one that had been planted for a family member or whatever, and it's a 3-foot tall spike currently. Can they cut that down to make it multiple trunk? Yes, that's what we did in the nursery business. I would take a crepe myrtle cutting, and we would root it in, and then it would just be a single trunk for a while, and then we would just literally cut them down to about 6 or 8 inches tall, and that would produce a multi-trunk tree. I would do that after it has a little bit of time in the ground and it's rooted in, or if it's in a container and it's happy, you can do that sooner than later. But that's what we did to produce. And then you'll get multiple pieces coming up, and you can select from those whether you want to keep 3 or 5 or whatever you want to keep at that point. But that's how we produce multi-trunk crepe myrtles. All right, last one for this week. Somebody said, please make a playlist for the Q&A so I can watch them back to back. There is a playlist on the channel for the question and answer videos. And if you go to my main channel page, the playlist, there's a playlist button on the channel page, and I've got, you know, if we've made videos for pollinators, there's a pollinator playlist. If you live in zone, back when I made almost exclusively just single plant videos, if you live in zone 7, there's a zone 7 playlist. You know, there's this garden, their playlist called New House, which is just the videos that have been shot since I've been here, and they're in order where you could watch them, the garden develop over 4 years. So the Q&As, and occasionally we'll get somebody, I'll miss putting it in the playlist, and I'll get somebody to make a comment down at the bottom. Can you please put the May 16th question and answer video in the playlist? I appreciate that when I see that, and I do it when I see them. So I think I have all the question and answer videos in a playlist. Boy, it would definitely help you get to sleep at night, maybe. If you've watched all these question and answers over the years. So thank you guys so much for participating and asking questions in the videos. And don't forget about the weekly garden planner. $30 discount is down below the video, and we're just going to continue to develop that over the years. And I think it'll be a useful tool for helping you maintain your garden in an ongoing way. Thanks for watching.